The black car rolled slowly through the narrow streets of a small coastal town. Inside sat a man named Richard Hale. He was 52 years old. He wore an expensive suit. His watch alone cost more than most people in this town earned in a whole year. Richard had built his fortune from nothing. He started with one small property when he was 25. Now he owned shopping centers, apartment buildings, and hotels across the country. People called him a genius. They called him unstoppable. But they also called him cold. Richard looked out the window at the old buildings passing by. He saw a bakery with faded paint. He saw a flower shop with a cracked window. He saw people walking slowly, talking to each other, smiling at small things. He did not understand this kind of life. To him, time was money. Every minute had a purpose. Every decision had a profit. His driver stopped the car in front of an old community center. The building was made of red bricks that had turned brown with age. The roof looked tired. The windows were dusty. A wooden sign above the door said, Harmony Hall, but some letters were missing. Richard stepped out of the car and looked at the building with the eyes of a businessman. He did not see history. He did not see memories. He saw land. Valuable land, near the beach. Land that could hold a luxury apartment complex worth millions. He had already made the deal. The town council had agreed to sell. They needed money for other things. Roads, schools, a new hospital wing. Richard gave them a good price. Not too high, not too low. Just enough to make them say yes. In 3 months, this old building would be gone. In its place would rise a modern tower of glass and steel. 40 floors, ocean views. Rich people would pay a fortune to live there. Richard walked toward the entrance. His assistant, a young man named Philip, followed close behind with a folder full of papers. Philip was nervous. He was always nervous around Richard. Everyone was. The building has been inspected, sir, Philip said quickly. Structural issues throughout. Plumbing is ancient. Electrical system is a hazard. Demolition will be straightforward. Richard nodded without looking back. He pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Old wood. Dust. Something like forgotten flowers. The main hall was large but dim. Sunlight came through the dirty windows in weak golden streams. There were rows of old chairs stacked against one wall. A small stage sat at the far end. Posters on the walls announced events from years ago. A Christmas concert from 1998. A children's dance show from 2005. A wedding anniversary celebration from 2012. Richard walked through the space slowly. His expensive shoes echoed on the wooden floor. He was already imagining the demolition. The machines. The noise. The dust rising as the old walls came down. Then, the construction. The concrete. The steel. The money flowing in like a river. He was about to turn and leave when he noticed something. Or, rather, someone. In the corner of the hall, near the stage, sat a woman. She was older, maybe in her late 50s. Her hair was gray and tied back in a simple knot. She wore plain clothes, a blue work shirt, dark trousers, comfortable shoes. She was sitting on a small wooden stool, and in front of her was an old upright piano. She was wiping the keys with a soft cloth, one by one, slowly and carefully, like she was caring for something precious. Richard watched her for a moment. She had not noticed him yet. Her focus was completely on the piano. Her hands moved gently. There was something in her face. A softness. A quietness. Richard did not understand it. Philip leaned close and whispered, "That is the janitor, sir. Her name is Eleanor. She has worked here for over 20 years. She cleans the building, maintains it as best she can." Richard said nothing. He walked closer. His footsteps made the woman look up. Her eyes were brown and calm. She did not seem surprised. She did not seem afraid. She simply looked at him the way someone looks at rain through a window. "You must be the new owner," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. Richard stopped a few feet away from her. Eleanor nodded. "I take care of this place. Have for a long time now." "Oh." Richard looked around at the dusty hall, the old chairs, the faded posters. "You have done what you could," he said. There was no kindness in his voice, just facts. "But this building is finished. I am sure you have heard. We will begin demolition soon. You should start looking for other work." Well, he expected her to argue, or to beg, or to cry. He had seen it before. People always fought when something was taken from them. But Eleanor did none of those things. She simply nodded again, slowly, and turned back to the piano. "I understand," she said quietly. "Things change. They always do." Richard felt strange. He was not used to this. People usually reacted. They got angry. They got sad. They asked for more time. This woman just accepted it, like she had accepted many hard things in her life before. He looked at her hands. They were not soft. They were rough, working hands. Hands that had scrubbed floors and fixed broken chairs and carried heavy things. Hands that had known struggle. Richard had hands like that once. Long ago. Before the money. Before the success. He had almost forgotten. "The piano," he said suddenly. "Is it yours?" Eleanor shook her head. "It belongs to the hall. It has been here longer than I have. Someone donated it maybe 40 years ago. No one knows who." "Does anyone play it?" "Sometimes the children do. When they come for classes, I teach them a little. Just basics. Nothing fancy." She paused and looked at the keys. "Mostly it just sits here, waiting." Richard checked his watch. He had seen enough. There was nothing here that would change his plans. This was just another old building in another small town. Another step in his journey toward more wealth, more power, more everything. "I have to go," he said. "I have meetings." Eleanor looked up at him one more time. Her eyes held something he could not read. Not anger. Not sadness. Something else. Something deeper. "Before you go," she said, "may I ask you something?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "What? When you tear this place down, what will happen to the piano?" He almost laughed. Of all the questions she could ask, about her job, about the town, about the people who used this hall for birthdays, and weddings, and funerals, she asked about an old piano that probably could not even hold a tune anymore. "I do not know," he said honestly. "It will probably be thrown away, or sold for parts. Does it matter?" Eleanor did not answer right away. She turned back to the piano and placed her hands gently on the keys, not pressing them, just resting there. "It matters to me," she said quietly. Richard shook his head and turned to leave. He had no time for sentiment. He had made his fortune by moving forward, never looking back. Old buildings came down. New ones went up. That was life. That was progress. But as he walked toward the door, something made him stop. He did not know what it was. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something else. Something he had buried long ago. He turned around one last time and looked at the woman sitting alone at the old piano in the dusty hall. She looked small, ordinary, forgettable. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, she would change his life forever, and nothing would ever be the same again. Richard stood near the door with his hand on the old wooden frame. His driver was waiting outside. His phone had already buzzed 3 times with messages from people who wanted his attention. There was a dinner meeting in the city that evening. Important investors. Big decisions. Real money. He had no reason to stay in this dusty hall with a janitor and a broken piano. But something held him there. He could not explain it. Maybe it was the way Eleanor had asked about the piano. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Or maybe it was something inside himself that he had ignored for too many years. A small voice. A distant memory. Something human that his busy life had slowly buried under contracts and numbers and deals. Philip stood beside him, checking his tablet. "Sir, we should leave now, if we want to make the city before traffic gets heavy." Richard nodded but did not move. He was still looking at Eleanor. She sat quietly at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. The sunlight coming through the dusty windows touched her gray hair and made it almost silver. She looked peaceful, content, like someone who had found something that most people spend their whole lives searching for. "1 minute," Richard said. Philip looked confused but said nothing. He had learned long ago not to question his boss. Richard walked back toward the piano. His footsteps echoed in the empty hall. Eleanor looked up as he approached. There was no surprise in her face. No expectation. She simply waited. "You said you teach children to play." Eleanor smiled softly. It was a small smile. Barely there. But it changed her whole face. Made her look younger somehow. "I used to," she said. "A long time ago." "Used to?" "What happened?" She looked down at the keys. Her fingers moved slightly, touching them without pressing. "Life happened," she said quietly. "The way it does for everyone." Richard did not know why, but he wanted to hear more. This was strange for him. He never cared about other people's stories. He had trained himself to see people as either useful or not useful. Investors, competitors, employees. That was all. But something about this woman made him curious. "Would you play something?" he asked. The words came out before he could stop them. Eleanor looked up at him. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hesitation, or perhaps a kind of fear. "I do not play anymore," she said. "Not really. Not like I used to." "Just once," Richard said. He did not know why he was pushing. "I want to hear what this old piano sounds like. Before it gets thrown away." It was almost cruel, the way he said it. He knew that. But he also knew that sometimes people needed a push. A reason. An excuse to do something they secretly wanted to do, but were afraid of. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the piano like it was an old friend she had not spoken to in years. Then slowly, very slowly, she straightened her back. She placed both hands on the keys. She closed her eyes, and she began to play. The first few notes were soft, gentle, like rain beginning to fall on a quiet morning. Richard did not recognize the piece. It was classical, he thought. Something old and beautiful. But it did not matter what it was. What mattered was how it sounded. As the music grew, something changed in the room. The dust, the decay, the sadness of the old building seemed to fade away. The notes filled every corner. They climbed the walls and touched the ceiling. They wrapped around Richard like something alive. He had been to concerts before. Expensive ones. He had sat in private boxes at symphony halls in London and Vienna and New York. He had heard orchestras with 100 musicians playing together in perfect harmony. But he had never heard anything like this. Eleanor played with her whole body. Her fingers moved across the keys like water flowing over stones. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes loud and powerful, sometimes soft as a whisper. Her eyes stayed closed. Her face held an expression that Richard could not name. It was not happiness exactly, not sadness either. It was something beyond both. Something pure. Philip had stopped looking at his tablet. He stood frozen near the door, his mouth slightly open. Even he, who cared nothing for music, could feel it. The beauty, the emotion, the truth in every note. The piece built and built, It rose like a wave, like a storm coming over the ocean. Richard felt his chest tighten. He felt something in his throat. His eyes began to sting. This had not happened to him in decades. Not since he was a boy. Not since before he learned to hide everything soft inside himself. He thought about his mother. She had died when he was 12. She used to hum songs while she cooked dinner in their tiny kitchen. He had forgotten that, until now. The memory came back so suddenly that it almost knocked him down. Then the music began to slow. The storm passed. The notes became gentle again, tender, like a hand brushing hair from a sleeping child's face, like a voice saying goodbye, like the last light of day fading over the water. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with everything the music had carried. Richard stood completely still. He realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out slowly. Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked at the keys for a moment. Then she looked at Richard. "That piano," she said softly, "still has a beautiful voice. It just needed someone to listen." Richard tried to speak but could not find words. This had never happened to him. He was a man who always knew what to say. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in every situation. But now he stood silent like a child. Finally, he managed one word. Eleanor tilted her head. What? How can you play like that?" His voice was rough, almost angry. But not at her. At something else. At the world, maybe. At himself. "You are a janitor. You clean floors. You fix broken chairs. How can you play like that?" Eleanor did not seem offended. She simply looked at him with those calm brown eyes. "I am a janitor," she said. "That is true. That is what I do now. But that is not all I have ever been. And it is not all I am." Richard shook his head. That was not just someone who knows how to play piano. That was something else. That was mastery. "I have heard professionals who cannot play half as well as you just did. I'm better professionals." "Oh no." Eleanor smiled that small smile again. "Thank you," she said. "That is kind of you to say." "I am not being kind. I am being honest." Richard stepped closer. "Who are you? Really, tell me the truth." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her rough hands. Hands that had worked so hard for so many years. Hands that had just created something impossibly beautiful. "I am just a woman," she said finally. "A woman who made choices. Some good, some hard. I am someone who had a dream once, a long time ago. And then I woke up and had to live in the real world." "What kind of dream?" She looked up at him, and in her eyes, Richard saw something he did not expect. Not regret. Not bitterness. Something else. Something like peace. "That," she said softly, "is a very long story." Richard looked at his watch. He looked at Philip standing by the door. He thought about the dinner meeting, the investors, the money. Then he did something he had not done in 30 years. He pulled up an old, dusty chair, sat down across from Eleanor, and said 4 simple words. "I have got time." Eleanor looked at Richard for a long moment. She seemed to be deciding something, whether to trust him, whether to open a door she had kept closed for many years. The old hall was quiet around them. Dust floated in the sunlight. Philip stood by the entrance, forgotten, still holding his tablet like he did not know what to do with it. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was soft but steady, like someone beginning a journey they had avoided for too long. "I was born in this town," she said. "Right here. My father was a fisherman. My mother worked at the local bakery. We did not have much money, but we had love. And we had music." She touched the piano keys gently, not playing, just feeling them under her fingers. "My mother played the piano, not professionally, just for fun, for joy. She would play in the evenings after work. Old songs, simple melodies. I would sit beside her, and watch her hands move. I thought it was magic. I wanted to learn that magic too. Richard listened without interrupting. This was not like him. He was a man who always spoke, who always led, who always controlled. But something about Eleanor's voice made him want to stay quiet, to just listen. I started learning when I was 5, Eleanor continued. My mother taught me at first. Then, when I got older, there was a teacher in town, an old woman named Mrs. Bellamy. She had studied in London when she was young. She heard me play one day and told my parents that I had a gift. A real gift. She said, it would be a crime to waste it. Eleanor smiled at the memory. A sad smile. A sweet smile. Mrs. Bellamy taught me for free. She said talent like mine should not be stopped by something as small as money. She pushed me hard, made me practice for hours every day. Sometimes I hated it. Sometimes I cried. But she never let me quit. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. Richard thought about his own youth. No one had believed in him. He had built everything alone, fought for every opportunity, trusted no one but himself. He wondered what his life might have been like if someone had believed in him, the way Mrs. Bellamy believed in Eleanor. When I was 17, Eleanor said, I auditioned for the Conservatoire de Paris. Do you know what that is? Richard nodded slowly. One of the best music schools in the world. Yes, the best for piano. I was terrified. I took a train to Paris with my mother. We had never left England before. Everything was strange and big and frightening. But when I sat down at the piano in that grand audition hall, something happened. I forgot my fear. I forgot everything. I just played. She paused. Her eyes were looking at something far away, something only she could see. They accepted me. Full scholarship. My mother cried for 3 days. Happy tears. Proud tears. Mrs. Bellamy said she always knew. My father did not understand music, but he understood that his daughter was going somewhere special. He hugged me so tight, I could not breathe. Eleanor's voice grew quieter now, like she was approaching the hard part of the story. I spent 4 years in Paris. I worked harder than I ever had before. I was surrounded by talented people from all over the world. Some of them came from wealthy families. They had private teachers since childhood. They had the best instruments, the best everything. And there I was, a fisherman's daughter from a tiny English town. But I kept up. More than kept up. I excelled. Richard leaned forward slightly. He was completely drawn into her story now. By the time I graduated, people were talking about me. Critics, conductors, important people in the music world. They said, I had something special, not just technique, something deeper, soul, they called it. I was offered a contract with a major orchestra, tours across Europe, recordings, everything I had dreamed of since I was 5 years old, sitting beside my mother at our old piano at home. She stopped. The silence stretched out between them. What happened? Richard asked. His voice was gentle, almost afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. Eleanor took a deep breath. I came home for a visit before the tour was supposed to start. I wanted to see my parents, to celebrate with them, to show them that all their sacrifices had been worth something. Her hands trembled slightly on the piano keys. That is when I found out about my daughter. Richard blinked. Your daughter? Eleanor nodded. I had met someone in Paris, a fellow student. We were young and foolish and in love. When I came home, I discovered I was pregnant. He did not want to be a father. He disappeared, went back to his country. I never saw him again. She said this without bitterness. Just facts. Things that happened long ago. I had a choice to make. The orchestra, the tour, the career I had worked my whole life for. Or my child. Everyone told me I could have both. That I could find a way. But I knew the truth. The kind of career I was being offered required everything. All my time, All my energy. All of me. There would be nothing left for a baby. Richard felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had made choices too. Hard choices. He had sacrificed relationships, friendships, love, all for his career, all for money. But he had never thought of it as sacrifice. He had thought of it as winning. So you gave it up, he said quietly. I gave it up, Eleanor confirmed. I came back here, to this town. I had my daughter. I named her Grace. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. More beautiful than any concert hall. More precious than any applause. She smiled. And this time the smile reached her eyes. I needed work, needed money. The community center was hiring a janitor. It was not glamorous. It was hard work. Long hours, low pay. But it was steady. And it let me be there for Grace. Every morning. Every evening. Every moment that mattered. Did you ever regret it? Richard asked. Eleanor thought about this carefully. There were moments, she admitted. Late at night. When Grace was asleep, I would hear music in my head. The pieces I used to play. The stages I would never stand on. The life I would never live. And yes, sometimes it hurt. Sometimes it hurt very much. She looked directly at Richard now, her brown eyes steady and clear. But then morning would come, and Grace would wake up, and she would smile at me, and I would know, deep in my heart, that I made the right choice. Not the easy choice. Not the choice the world would have made, but the right one. For me. For her. Richard sat in silence. He was thinking about his own life. The buildings he had bought. The deals he had made. The money in his accounts. He had everything the world said he should want. But sitting here, listening to this woman who had given up fame and fortune for love, he felt something strange. Something uncomfortable. He felt empty. What happened to Grace? He asked finally. Eleanor's face softened even more. She is grown now. 32 years old. She works as a nurse in London. She saves lives every day. She has a kind heart and gentle hands. She is everything I hoped she would be, and more. Does she know? About who you were? What you gave up? Eleanor nodded. I told her when she turned 18. I showed her the old newspaper clippings. The reviews from Paris. The photos. She cried. She asked me if I was angry at her. For being born. For taking my dream away. What did you say? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper now. I told her the truth. That she did not take my dream away. She became my dream. A different dream. A better one. Richard said nothing. He could not. There was something in his throat. Something in his eyes. Something he had not felt in a very long time. He looked at Eleanor. The janitor. The cleaner. The woman in worn clothes with rough hands. And for the first time, he saw her. Really saw her. Not what she appeared to be. But who she truly was. Richard did not go to his dinner meeting that night. He called and canceled. His investors were confused. His assistant, Philip, was shocked. In 30 years of working together, Richard had never canceled a meeting. Not for sickness. Not for emergencies. Not for anything. But that night, Richard sat alone in his hotel room and stared at the ceiling until morning came. He could not stop thinking about Eleanor. Her story. Her music. Her choices. Everything she said kept playing in his mind, like a song he could not forget. He thought about his own mother humming in the kitchen. He thought about the dreams he had when he was young, before money became the only thing that mattered. He thought about all the years he had spent building his empire, brick by brick, deal by deal, never stopping to ask why. The next morning, he told Philip to clear his schedule. Philip looked at him like he had lost his mind. But he did as he was told. Richard drove back to the small coastal town alone. He did not know exactly why. He just knew he needed to see Eleanor again. He needed to understand something. Something about her. Something about himself. When he arrived at Harmony Hall, he found the door open. He could hear sounds from inside. Not music this time. Voices. Small voices. Children laughing and talking over each other. He walked in quietly and stood near the back of the hall. What he saw made him stop. Eleanor was sitting at the piano, but she was not alone. Around her sat 8 children. They ranged in age from maybe 6 to 12. They were crowded together on wooden chairs and old cushions, watching her with wide eyes. Eleanor was smiling at them. A real smile. Warm and patient. She was pointing at the piano keys and explaining something. One little girl with messy brown hair raised her hand eagerly. Eleanor nodded at her, and the girl came forward, shyly. The child sat on the piano bench beside Eleanor. Her small fingers reached for the keys. She pressed one note, then another. The sounds were clumsy and uneven. Nothing like the beautiful music Eleanor had played yesterday. But Eleanor nodded encouragingly. She guided the girl's hands gently. She whispered something that made the child giggle. Richard watched from the shadows. He felt like an intruder, like he was seeing something private. Something sacred. After a while, Eleanor looked up and saw him. She did not seem surprised. She whispered something to the children, and they all turned to look at the tall man in the expensive suit standing at the back of the hall. Some of them waved. One little boy with red hair stuck out his tongue. The others laughed. Thanks for watching. Eleanor stood and walked toward Richard. The children stayed at the piano, taking turns, pressing keys and making sounds that were more noise than music. You came back, Eleanor said simply. Richard nodded. I did not expect to find you here. Working. It is Saturday. I teach the children every Saturday, Eleanor said. Have done for 15 years now. They come from families that cannot afford private lessons. Some of them have never touched a piano before they walked through those doors. Richard looked at the children. They were playing now. Not really playing music, just exploring, discovering. Their faces were full of wonder and joy. You do this for free, Richard said. It was not a question. I do. Why? Eleanor smiled. Because someone did it for me once. Mrs. Bellamy. She saw something in me and gave me a chance. She changed my life. Maybe I cannot give these children what she gave me. Maybe none of them will go to Paris or play in concert halls. But maybe one of them will find something in music that helps them through a hard day, a hard year, a hard life. That is enough. That is more than enough. Richard was quiet for a long moment. He watched a small boy with glasses carefully press 3 keys in a row, then look up at his friends with pride like he had just climbed a mountain. I have been thinking all night, Richard said finally, about what you told me. Eleanor waited. I do not understand, he admitted. You could have had everything. Fame, fortune, your name in history books. People would still be talking about you today. Instead, you are here, in this old building, teaching children who will probably never remember your name. Cleaning floors, fixing chairs. How can you not feel cheated? How can you not be angry at the world? Eleanor looked at him with those calm brown eyes. She did not answer right away. Instead, she turned and looked at the children, still gathered around the piano. One girl was showing another how to play a simple pattern. 3 notes, over and over. Both of them were concentrating so hard their tongues were sticking out. Do you see that little girl? Eleanor asked, pointing to the one teaching. Her name is Lily. Her father left when she was 3. Her mother works 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Lily came here 2 years ago. She was so shy she would not even look at me, would not speak, just sat in the corner and watched. Richard followed her gaze. Now look at her, Eleanor continued. She is teaching. She is leading. She found something inside herself that she did not know was there. Music did that. Not me. Music. I just opened the door. She walked through it herself. Eleanor turned back to Richard. You asked how I cannot feel cheated, but you are looking at it wrong. You are measuring my life by what I lost. I measure it by what I found. What I gave. What I built. Not buildings, Mr. Hale. Not towers of glass and steel. Something else. Something that matters more. Richard felt her words hit him somewhere deep. Somewhere he had protected for a very long time. I have built a lot of things, he said quietly. Shopping centers, hotels, apartment complexes. My name is on buildings in 12 different cities, but I have never built anything like this. He gestured at the children. At the old piano. At the dusty hall filled with Saturday morning sunlight. No. Eleanor agreed gently. You have not. It was not an insult, not an accusation, just a truth, spoken simply and without judgment. Richard felt something crack inside him. Not break, just crack. Like ice at the end of a long winter, when the first warmth of spring begins to touch it. Is it too late? He asked. His voice was barely a whisper. To build something that matters? Eleanor reached out and placed her rough hand on his arm. Her touch was light, but steady. It is never too late, she said. Not for anyone. Not for you. Richard looked into her eyes. This woman, who had given up everything the world valued. This woman, who cleaned floors and taught children for free. This woman who had more peace in her heart than he had found in 52 years of chasing success. How do I start? He asked. Eleanor smiled. That small, warm smile that changed her whole face. You already have, she said. You came back. You asked. You listened. That is how it starts. With one small choice, then another, until one day, you wake up and realize you have become someone different. Someone better. The children were calling for Eleanor now. They wanted her to play something. They wanted to hear the magic again. She looked at Richard one last time. Would you like to stay? She asked. And listen? Richard thought about all the places he could be, all the deals waiting, all the money to be made, all the buildings to be bought. Then he looked at the children gathered around the old piano in the dusty hall. Yes, he said. I would like that very much. 2 months passed. The small coastal town had seen many changes over the years. Shops had opened and closed. Families had come and gone. Seasons had turned from summer to autumn to winter and back again. But no one in town had ever seen a change like this. On a bright Saturday morning in spring, the whole town gathered outside Harmony Hall. But it did not look like Harmony Hall anymore. The old brown bricks had been cleaned until they glowed red again. The tired roof had been replaced with fresh new tiles. The windows sparkled in the sunlight. The wooden sign above the door had been restored, and now all the letters were there, painted in deep blue with gold edges. But there was something else too. A new sign beneath the old one. It read, Eleanor Winters, Community Arts Center. People stood in small groups on the street, talking excitedly. Children ran between the adults, laughing and chasing each other. Local newspaper reporters held cameras and notepads. Even a television crew had come from the city. Everyone wanted to see what had happened. Everyone wanted to know why. Inside the hall, Eleanor stood alone near the piano. But it was not the old upright piano anymore. That one had been carefully restored and moved to a place of honor near the entrance, with a small plaque explaining its history. In its place, on the stage, sat a brand new grand piano, black and shining, the most beautiful instrument Eleanor had ever seen. She touched its smooth surface with trembling fingers. She still could not quite believe any of this was real. 2 months ago, she had been a janitor preparing to lose her job. Now her name was on a building. Her life's work had been recognized. Her story had been told. The door opened behind her. She turned to see Richard walking in. He looked different than the first time she had met him. Not his clothes. Those were still expensive. Not his watch. That still cost more than most people earned in a year. But something in his face had changed. The hardness was gone. The coldness had melted. He looked like a man who had finally found something he had been searching for without knowing it. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Eleanor shook her head. "I have not performed in front of an audience in over 30 years. I am terrified." Richard smiled. "Good. That means it matters." He walked closer and stood beside her, looking at the grand piano. "I want to thank you," he said. Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "Thank me? You are the one who did all this. You saved the building. You paid for the restoration. You created the scholarship fund for the children. You changed everything." "No," Richard said firmly. "You changed everything. You changed me. I was a man who thought success meant money, power, buildings with my name on them. I thought I had won at life, but I was empty inside. I did not even know it until you sat at that broken piano and played, until you told me your story, until you showed me what real success looks like." Eleanor's eyes grew wet. She blinked and looked away. "I have made a lot of money in my life," Richard continued. "More than I could ever spend. But this is the first time I have ever used it for something that actually matters. This building, these programs, the music lessons for children who could never afford them. This is the first thing I have built that I am truly proud of." Eleanor reached out and took his hand. Her rough fingers wrapped around his. They stood together in silence for a moment. Two people from completely different worlds who had somehow found each other. "Your daughter is here," Richard said finally. "She arrived this morning." Eleanor's face lit up. "She is outside. She wanted to surprise you. She took time off work to come. She said she would not miss this for anything in the world." Eleanor pressed her hand to her heart. She had not seen Grace in months. Her daughter was so busy saving lives in London. They talked on the phone every week, but it was not the same as being together. The doors of the hall opened wider. People began streaming in. Townspeople who had known Eleanor for decades. Children she had taught over the years. Some of them now teenagers. Some of them young adults. The mayor was there in his best suit. Mrs. Bellamy's granddaughter had come, carrying an old photograph of her grandmother. And there, walking through the crowd, was Grace. She was tall and beautiful with her mother's brown eyes. She wore a simple blue dress. When she saw Eleanor standing by the piano, she stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the crowded room. Then Grace smiled, and Eleanor smiled back, and nothing else mattered. Grace made her way through the crowd and wrapped her arms around her mother. They held each other tight. Eleanor could feel her daughter's heart beating against her own. This was everything. This was all she had ever needed. "I am so proud of you, Mum," Grace whispered. Eleanor could not speak. She just held her daughter closer. The ceremony began. The mayor gave a speech about community and dedication and the importance of the arts. Richard spoke about transformation and second chances, and finding meaning in unexpected places. He did not mention how much money he had spent. He did not talk about himself at all. He only talked about Eleanor, her sacrifice, her grace, her gift. Then it was time. Eleanor walked to the grand piano. The room fell silent. Every eye was on her. The janitor, the cleaner, the woman who had given up everything for love. She sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys. She closed her eyes, and she began to play. The music that filled the room was unlike anything the townspeople had ever heard. It was the same piece she had played for Richard that first day. But it was different too. Deeper, fuller, richer, like a river that had been held back for 30 years and was finally allowed to flow free. People in the audience began to cry. The mayor wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. Children sat perfectly still, hypnotized by the beauty. Grace stood at the front of the room with tears streaming down her face, watching her mother do something she had only heard about in stories. Richard stood at the back of the hall. He was crying too. He did not try to hide it. He let the tears fall. He let the music wash over him. He let himself feel everything he had been running from his whole life. The piece built and soared. It whispered and thundered. It told the story of a young girl from a small town who dreamed of something beautiful. It told the story of a mother who chose love over fame. It told the story of a man who learned that some things matter more than money. It told the story of all of them. Every person in that room. Every person who had ever had to choose. Every person who had ever lost something and found something else. When the final note faded, the silence lasted for 3 heartbeats. Then the room erupted. People stood and clapped and cheered. They called Eleanor's name. They would not stop. Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked at the crowd, at her daughter, at Richard, at the faces of children she had taught, who were now clapping with tears in their eyes. She had never played in the great concert halls of Europe. Her name was not in history books. The world had forgotten the young prodigy from Paris long ago. But in this moment, in this small town, in this old building with her name on the door, surrounded by people whose lives she had touched, Eleanor Winters finally understood something she had always known, but never quite believed. She had not given up her dream. She had found a better one.